So thanks to the Media Insider for yet another great set of examples about reception theory. So I hope that you'll be able to use that notion of dominant, negotiated, or oppositional reading to help you understand how you are making sense of the show that you're working on or the episode that you're working on. So if you want to get started using those concepts, encoding, decoding, and dominant, oppositional, or negotiated readings, here are some great questions in the slide stack that you can start with. So what meanings are preferred by the program? In other words, what are the dominant meanings? What would they like you to take away from the program? And then given that other meanings are possible, which is what we call polysemy, what can different viewers make of it? And can you relate that to their social position, their demographic situation? So if they're watching an episode of Blackish, it may matter whether they're African American or white audiences. And how do you think that would change their interpretation? Finally, how might the decoded meanings give the viewer a sense of power or pleasure? So we'll get to that somewhat later, but there's certainly plenty of opportunity in television for male viewers to take certain pleasure or to feel empowered as they watch images of women who are, there in order to be looked at and presented kind of as objects of beauty rather than as anything challenging. So that might be an example there. So see if you can use that on any of your own reflections. All right. Now let's move on. I want to talk now about the concept of ideology. And so, as I mentioned, this was inspirational to Stuart Hall and the theorists of cultural studies from the 1970s. 100 years earlier, Karl Marx had been thinking about economic domination. It was the midst of the Industrial Revolution, and he was living in England, and it was an extremely unequal and unjust society. So he felt that economic domination was the most important thing, but that economic domination had to be sold to the population somehow. And he said ideology does this. So his notion of ideology is it's ideas in the service of power. So the idea of ideology is it is a set of meanings which legitimate the domination under which people are living. So it's the idea, for instance, of the American dream is a great example. America is great for a lot of us, not so great for some of us, but the American dream is the ideology that anybody can get ahead if they work hard enough, that it's an equal playing field. And so that's what keeps us on board with our own form of economic domination. So that's an example of ideology. And as you can see, the definition here in yellow, they agreed on to a point that they constitute a set of norms for a society that dictate what is desirable, what should be done. This does connect with that first definition of culture we saw earlier on as a sort of set of rules to follow. So that's why the cultural studies people went back to Marx. And as they developed on Marx, they were interested not just in economic domination, but in other what they call ideological codes. In other words, very strong sets of beliefs in our culture about individualism, about patriarchy, about class, about materialism and capitalism. Sorry about that little message. I'm not getting to my office often enough for my computer to be happy. So that's the definitions of ideology. My goodness, is this going to stop bugging me? So this could lead to some very simplistic notions of ideology. In other words, the critique that a show is simply promoting one form of ideology, the dominant view, and nothing else is possible. And certainly, if we look at some politically motivated programming, like take a look at Fox News or MSNBC or something, we'll definitely see some one-sided ideological positions presented to us. But what I think is more interesting in television criticism is if we look at our shows as sort of places where different ideologies can compete. So often a television show won't just have one point of view, it will present several points of view. It may have a stake in one of them as being better, but it'll still kind of arrange a sort of an ideological conflict or sparring match. First of all, it brings up the drama, but also it brings a kind of a competition of ideas into TV, which can be quite interesting. So I have a couple of examples here in the slide stack, which I'm going to show in a sec. And now that we're into ideological codes, I think we could look at this example from One Day at a Time about Elena. She's a character young woman who is becoming aware of her sexuality. She realizes that she's gay. Her family has a range of different reactions. So this is where we get the sort of ideological competition going on. Or so it's like, does the show side with Elena? Probably, but it also presents other points of view. And I'll also include a second clip. Here's a scene from Blackish, where it's a show that was produced in the midst of the Black Lives Matter moment, but it also contains a range of opinions as to the relations between African Americans and the police. It doesn't just have a single dominant idea. It presents different options with which an audience might be more or less drawn to side with. So let's check out those two examples and I'll be back with more.